right, you're back in the smoke-filled room. This is our first episode of our second year. Can't believe we've been doing this now for over a year. And with session in Springfield ending in, frankly, days, we have to have a episode pretty much exclusively focused on what the heck is happening in Springfield. Because you know the old adage, when the politicians are in Springfield, hold on to your wallets because something good ain't going to happen, I'm sure. So because of that, we've got some pretty special guests this week, and I'm excited about who we have with us. Let's start with Beth Smith. She's a LaSalle County board member. She was a township supervisor. She's a nuclear engineer, so clearly the smartest person on this podcast by far, and one of the most active grassroots people on the center-right side in the whole state of Illinois. So an awesome perspective we're going to have from Beth. Beth, I'm glad to have you this week.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I listen every week, so I'm honored to be here. Thanks.
All right. Well, now you get a chance to share your brilliance on an episode, so we're glad for that.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. All right. We also have Noah Finley. He's the state director for Illinois for NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business. Also has a very good amount of experience in government itself. He was a deputy chief of staff for the Illinois State Senate. Also worked with the Senate Republican Victory Fund. Noah's got a ton of experience in Illinois politics, and he's here with us today. Noah, what's going on?
You know, it's another session day, and it's a
how much sleep have you gotten in the last couple of weeks is the real question. How much sleep have you gotten in the last few weeks?
You know, we're kind of reaching the period where there's a lot of refer back to like what we used to say in the Army, there's a lot of hurry up and wait. We've really hit that point during the legislative session. So there's high pressure times, and then there's also times where it's relatively slow.
Fair. Well, speaking of that, David Curtin, David had a bit of a rush just before we recorded this episode on Thursday because he had to rush to the floor because one of his bills was being discussed and then rush back to us to talk. So we've got lobbyist extraordinaire David Curtin, who's been in politics, in government for, I think, decades, David. I mean, you were one of the first people I worked with way back when I was a little pup. You currently lobby for TMA, the Technology Manufacturing Association, advocating for small and mid-sized manufacturers throughout the state of Illinois. And we're glad to have your perspective here this week with us.
Thanks. It's good to be on.
All right. And we have Christen Drew. She is the owner of Cafe Bloom in Benton, also the office manager for Drew Law Group. And she was a news reporter back in the day, bringing her perspective, especially as we talk about some things happening in Springfield as a small business owner, as a restaurant owner. Really powerful perspective she's going to bring on today's episode. And Christen, I'm glad you're here to do that.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And we have Rich Carter. He's Core Strategy's government affairs expert. You'll notice we don't have Michael and Chris, our political experts this week, mostly because this is mostly a government-centered episode focused on policy. So Rich is sitting in for them. The pressure is on, Rich, for you to do just as well as Chris and Michael combined. I'm not sure if you can handle that.
Yeah, probably not. We'll see. I'll give it my best effort.
We're going to find out. All right, let's get right into it. So first topic we got to talk about is Pritzker's budget. So it just happened in the last week that Pritzker has upped the pressure on nervous Democrats who aren't super excited about backing tax increases in an election year, because there's a rule in government: you do your tax increases in off years, you do your decreases in on years, because you got to be on the ballot. Pritzker is breaking that rule and trying to force vulnerable Democrats into voting for tax increases, $1 billion, might I add, nearly, in tax increases during an election year. And so over the last week, he has instructed his agency directors to find basically $800 million in cuts. He admitted publicly the whole point of this was to put pressure on Democrats to say, fine, if you don't vote for my tax increases, basically your favorite programs might go bye-bye, so vote for my tax increases. That's essentially, he even said it out loud at a press conference. That's what he was trying to accomplish there. So this is basically a budget free-for-all topic for anybody who'd like to come in. But essentially, as COVID money dries up, as federal dollars dry up, the budget makers in Springfield, which at this point are almost exclusively Democrats, since they won't let Republicans be part of the conversation, are starting to realize it's a lot harder to balance your checkbook when you don't have free money to do it. And now they're looking at either having to make cuts or raise taxes in an election year. Curious what anybody thinks about what's going on with this.
Yeah, well,
go ahead. All right, I
Well,
was just going to say, Colin, this again is, you know, I told you so. Republicans have been saying this for years since all that federal COVID money came in. First thing the Democrats do is they take the money and they expand programs, you know, rather than using it to cover other expenses that they may have. Just keep building the programs, and lo and behold, 2-3 years later, when the federal money dries up, they still want to keep those programs around. That's what's going on here. And that's why, you know, and the way to pay for it now, if there's not COVID money, let's just put $1 billion in tax hikes on the back of the business community in our state. And that's what's going on. And as you said, you can do that in a non-election year, but in an election year, it's a lot tougher. So we'll see what happens.
Well, Rich, to your point, anybody in the business community or even the conservative community who pointed out during COVID that the budget was balanced because of COVID and that they were spending this money on new programs were called doom grifters and anything else. They were chastised and vilified by Pritzker. And yet here we are, Pritzker admitting, hey, look, a lot of this money went into one-time programs or went into programs, this one-time money from the federal government. And now legislators have to decide if they want to continue it. So it has to be one or the other. You can't say that none of the federal money went to ongoing spending and then say now that the federal money is gone, we may not be able to maintain that ongoing spending. We were made fun of for 3-4 years. Anytime a conservative group or organization pointed to the fact that this money was not being spent wisely, and now here we are.
Yeah, and the governor was, it was kind of one of the deals where the governor was taking credit for doing a lot of things with the COVID money, but he would never mention COVID. He would just always mention that we've got the revenues to do this and do that. And so now it's time to ante up. He's got to cut or he's got to raise revenues, and I'm surprised the Democrats are giving as much trouble to as they are, because they're in a super majority. But they are, and they're going to continue that until they can come up with a budget.
Well, Noah, I'm just curious what you've seen. I know from, as Rich said, a lot of these tax increases are going to impact businesses. I know Pritzker likes to say it's just the big businesses, but it doesn't tend to be the MO in Illinois that, you know, small businesses get saved from a lot of the tax impact. Curious what you're seeing on your end.
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting telling what happens over this next week. As you know, most of these budget discussions happen behind closed doors. So it's not always clear what's currently on the table. There are the way the tax package that the governor laid out, which he didn't mention during his State of the States and budget address, but he laid out in his budget documents. Really, it didn't hit everyone equally. So it wouldn't impact every business out there or some small businesses. But there's a whole range there, and there's been significant pushback on many of these proposals, whether it's the retail discount, which is the percentage of the sales tax a retailer can keep, basically to cover its costs for doing the tax collection for the state. So that there's been pushback on that one. There's actually a subject matter hearing on that this past week. There all these other ones, raising or basically not raising the personal income tax deduction in line with inflation, just slowing that down, so hurting the frontline consumer or taxpayer. And at this point, admittedly, I don't have a great clarity on exactly what is in that package. Obviously, with the governor's memo that he sent out to the agencies, there's some pushback in the General Assembly about passing some of these bills, but there's also a high desire to spend. So how the General Assembly weighs that out is still something monitoring pretty closely.
Well, and you mentioned it, Noah. You talk about a high desire to spend. Pritzker's not been in office that long, and in that time, the state budget has exploded by nearly $13 billion. It's now almost $53 billion. That's a significant increase in spending sorry. So, and I mean, when you look at the governor's own budgetary projections, so he's
he's projecting out, his office is projecting out deficits beyond this year. And those deficits actually grow going forward. So this isn't just a one-time issue. This is something we could be facing for years ahead, and trying to balance revenues and this desire to spend more money.
Well, and to that point, you look at, of course, this got barely mentioned in any of the press, but the GOMB in the May 7th report pointed to the fact that the state's spending rate is $743 million over budget. So we're talking about needing nearly $1 billion in tax increases to fund programs in next year's budget, and yet we're $750 million, so $750 million over budget for this year. Those numbers are pretty close to each other. Maybe if we just stop overspending, we wouldn't need to be asking for more taxes. I'm not an economist, but that seems pretty basic.
Well, a lot of that money is the health insurance benefits that they have to pay to the illegal aliens. And they had a pretty bad fight in the caucus the other day between the African-American caucus, who thought that the Latino caucus was taking money away from them. And it even spilled over into publicly into a committee hearing. So there are very intense feelings about this within the Democrat caucus. You think that, well, everybody's talking about why should we be giving illegal immigrants health care? There's that question out there. But inside the Democrat caucus, a lot of that money that they're trying to make up is to serve the health insurance costs of the illegal immigrants, and the African-American caucus is not taking that very well.
Well, and you're right. And it's even, it goes even further to migrants as well. So you just sort of under the catch-all of non-citizens. And I think the Black Caucus has a pretty solid argument that, we've been screaming about disinvestment in our communities for decades, and yet you're somehow magically finding the money for non-citizens. It's a solid argument. Christen, I know, is a small business owner. I want to pass it to you. Is there a level of frustration amongst business owners that, every time Springfield seems to need more money, it's just, oh yeah, go to the business owners. They can pay more money. It's fine.
I can definitely say we're certainly frustrated. Something's got to give. You can't continue to double our electric bill, constantly increase taxes. With the cost of inflation, most of my supplies as a restaurant owner have tripled. And now we're talking about upping the minimum wage. Wow. I mean, the timing seems really bad.
Well, and I'm going to go right to you on that next, talking about the tip minimum wage. So we're going to get into that in a second. I just think one last thing here that Noah brought up that deserves attention. And if anyone wants to comment on it before we finish off this topic, something that has not gotten the attention it should have. When they talk about the tax increases that Pritzker is requesting in his budget document, nobody seems to remember or cover the fact that the standard exemption for taxpayers was not in that budget, was not raised to the level it should have been because of inflation. Pritzker brought it lower even than his own office wanted it to be. And that's a tax increase on every single Illinoisan who files taxes in the state. And that's lower income. I mean, many upper income people will itemize their taxes, so they don't care about the standard deduction. And so when you talk about that tax increase, that's not big businesses or tax the rich. That's taxing working families, everyday Illinoisans, in order to fund this budget. And that's not getting covered enough because it's sort of hidden in the budget. It's just, we're setting the standard exemption, but they're setting it lower than it ought to be. That in and of itself is a tax increase, and that is not getting attention like it should.
Sure. And I think that there's tax increases like that, but we're also seeing from many of my members' perspective, small businesses, there's a lot of other costs that are being imposed on them through new mandates that aren't always reflected in taxes. So like this on January 1st, went into effect a new paid leave mandate for businesses across the state. That has risen costs very significantly for many of my members because now they're having to put these new costly paid leave mandates out there. There's some who are already advocating that they extend leave mandates further, even as we're trying to resolve exactly what. Like, we don't even have those paid leave mandates, the administrative rules in place yet for them. And we're 4.5 months into, I guess 5.5 months now into the new mandate. and the Department of Labor, in theory, they've finalized them, but they haven't published those rules yet. And so there's still a lot of uncertainty. And we're just seeing mandates at both federal and at the state level that are really bearing down increasing costs on your small businesses without huge administrative capabilities. So that owner's just having to juggle all these new requirements, figure out what he's supposed to do or she's supposed to do to remain compliant with the law.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough being a business owner in this state, especially a small business owner. Speaking of that, all right, before we close out this topic, we are, as we teased last week, we are going to start doing some fun new segments on these episodes. We've done it a few weeks in a row now. So the song of the week, this is our topic of the week. So we've got to pump out a song of the week. I go in to the AI music generator, put in a handful of words and say, I want a song about blank, and it spits it out. It creates the lyrics, the music. So I haven't heard this song. None of us have. I did not pick the song's style. It picks it itself. This one is contemporary pop, and I'm not a big pop guy, but hey, we'll check it out. So we're going to bring this up. We're going to play this. Lane will bring it up in post for those of you who are watching, so you can hear it a little bit better than maybe we can hear it. But since we're all hearing this for the first time, you're going to get a chance to watch us listen to this live. Let me bring it up. All right, everybody, just visually indicate that you can hear it once I start playing this.
Taxman knocking on the door says we gotta give a little more. Governor's got his eyes on our cash, says we're gonna have to feel the slash. Small businesses trying to survive, working hard to keep the dream alive. But the tax man, he don't understand. He's squeezing us with an iron hand. We're taxed and tired, can't you see? Too much burden on you and me. We're working hard just to get by, but the government, it makes us cry.
I'll stop it there. That wasn't bad for an AI generated song. I like that.
Pretty good.
Yeah, that's my new
I'm-
that's my new theme song.
I'm not super poppy, but I like this. The governor's got his eyes on our cash. The tax man don't understand. It was pretty good. It was not bad. All right, we had some fun. Let us know what you guys think. We can maybe put the songs out each week as standalone things. But for our first try, that was pretty good. All right, I mentioned it earlier. Christen, I want to go right to you on this. You mentioned it. There's a big effort in Illinois, and it seems like they've kind of quieted down lately, which always scares me when they try to quiet something down. It means they're going to try to sneak it through one night. But there's a big fight to raise the tipped minimum wage, and a lot of groups have aligned to stop this. There's a group called Protect Illinois Hospitality that's running a huge statewide effort to stop this. I really want the perspective of family-run restaurants like yours. And so, Christen, if you can just kick us off on this. I mean, we've heard over and over how this will raise costs. This will create lots of problems for small businesses and restaurants like yours. What's your perspective on this?
Look, I'm all for people making more money. So my perspective on this is, while it sounds like, an effort that's based in taking care of the worker, I don't think that is what will ultimately end up happening. I think if you start seeing this occur, first of all, I hope you enjoy chain restaurants, because the locally owned ma and pop places they don't have the purchasing power to compete. And number two, I think what you're ultimately going to end up seeing is businesses like mine just hiring less people, because we simply can't afford more. And so while I think certain people in politics are kind of, trying to sell this as, hey, we really want to increase wages for the average working person, I don't think that will ultimately be what happens. Yeah.
Pass it to our policy experts. I'm sure Noah probably especially got some thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, no, it's a very important one. And the good news is that I think restaurant owners like Christen and others, they contacted their representatives. Their legislators heard about it, and they got scared and they backed away from it. So in the committee hearing on this topic, it was actually pretty amusing to watch because the majority party was shuffling legislators in and out, trying to get to the number of votes to get it out of committee. And they only got it out of committee with the commitment that it would be held on second reading and for an agreement, and there's no agreement. So it's not something I anticipate seeing much more of this spring. Whether it comes back after the election, that's always a possibility. But I think we're good through this spring. But it is, as Christen mentioned, it's a huge issue. Like under current law, your tip labor, they have to receive minimum wage. It's a credit to take into account the tips that they receive. And these full service restaurants are really have been under the gun post-COVID. The Atlantic recently reported that full service restaurants, there are like hundreds of thousands of dollars of employees less in that industry than there were pre-pandemic. We're also seeing just more restaurants closing. The Wall Street Journal reported earlier this year that through last November, we saw approximately 4,500 restaurants close, independent restaurants close in aggregate last year through November alone. So our restaurant industry is under a lot of strain right now. And something like that, this proposal is going to raise costs when consumers are already they're suffering. Food prices up, eating out costs are way up. And this would just add further flame on this inflationary pressure we're seeing in the economy and would really be detrimental to our restaurant industry.
An interesting fact, in Illinois, the median tipped restaurant employee makes more than $28 an hour, which is double the minimum wage of $14 an hour.
Well, and to that point, Beth, it's a great point. Noah said the thing that doesn't get reported, which is there's already a law that these tip workers have to make at least minimum wage. If they come in under minimum wage, then the employers have to bridge that gap. So they already have a safety net in place. And to your point, a lot of these tip workers do much better than that. I know my wife early on in her life, when she was working her way through college, worked as a waitress in a hotel. And she made way more because she worked hard, she's personable, she's likable, and she made way more than minimum wage. I mean, so you're absolutely right. This is one of those situations where policymakers, lawmakers want a great mailer they can put out, but does the policy actually back up what they're pushing?
And one of the things we're seeing, particularly here in Illinois, is Illinois has one of the highest unemployment rates already in the country. We're up there. I think last I saw, we're tied for 48th as far as the unemployment. And that's not where any state wants to be. And then a proposal like this is kind of anti-jobs. It's going to raise a cost on the employer. And it's not just restaurants. You have other tip wage jobs out there too that it could impact. And we need more jobs, not less jobs here in Illinois.
Yeah, that's a capstone to end this point. So let's move to our next topic. David, I know you came straight from the floor as we record this on Thursday for a Friday release. Let's talk about BIPA. So we've talked about this probably a good dozen times. What, Rich, over the last year or so is the big problem in Illinois. David, you've been on the front lines on this, trying to get something done, especially for small and mid-sized businesses. In your case, small and mid-sized manufacturers, trying to stop the flow of blood from this open wound. Looks like maybe finally something's happening. So where are we at on this, and why is it a good thing?
Well, they passed Bill 2979, about within the last half hour, and it's on its way to the governor's desk. And what that bill does is when they take biometric information, for example, if you're clocking in with your thumb, and that takes that biometric information. If you did not have the employee sign a piece of paper, then all the times they clocked in, maybe 10,000 times, you would be fined $1,000 for each of the 10,000 times. This bill, if it's signed into law, would say, no, it's just one person that should be fined $1,000. But it's a very controversial issue, but back in 2008, they passed, I know you talked about a lot, but all companies have to do is sign a piece of paper. And in this bill, they made it for electronic signatures, and you're complying with the law if you have anybody clock in like that. It's for companies that don't have the resources to know that they need that signed piece of paper that this law is for. So lots of good people on both sides of it, and it's one of those glass half full, half empty type of things. But now they're getting rid of the huge shakedowns that the lawyers are coming to the companies for, and saying, would you like to pay $1 billion here because of the way the law is written, or would you like to pay $15,000 or $500,000 and settle out of court? So hopefully it'll reduce all those settlements and the lawyers coming after.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it, David. This was a boondoggle for the trial lawyers. That's basically what this was. And the law is not perfect. There are things in there that we'd love to see that should frankly be in there. Yes, but it's been this didn't get fixed last year because people couldn't get on the same page, and we run the risk of it not getting fixed again this year. And Rich, I'm going to ask you to jump in next just real quick. You gave a number previously about the number of especially small businesses and small manufacturers that are facing lawsuits on BIPA right now. This was urgent. There's a number of family-run manufacturers who might have to close their doors if this doesn't get fixed. This is an urgent problem. Rich, what was that number that you gave?
Yeah, there's a study done just in Chicago and the Collar counties alone. I think there are currently something like 1,300 businesses that are under facing a BIPA lawsuit right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. So it's definitely not perfect. And as you said, David, some good people, well-meaning people are on the opposing side of this just because it isn't good enough. And we respect that for sure. But your perspective is small and mid-sized. And as you said, those are the ones that are getting destroyed by this. Yeah, White Castle, we respect their needs, but really this is about the small and mid-sized manufacturers who didn't even know they were supposed to have a simple piece of paper signed because they don't have the resources to be able to know that that's what they should have done in this situation. And now they're being penalized for it. So glad to see work's being done to try to help them out.
Yeah, and if you look at it, White Castle, this big corporation with this huge legal department, all the resources at their disposal, they were caught off guard by this law. So you can imagine all the small and mid-sized manufacturers who do not have legal departments. All they do is hire a lawyer, and the lawyer comes and says, you might as well go ahead and settle because this law is ambiguous. So it's not their fault. And there was no harm done to any employees. This is the first time that settlements or damages are given to people that there's no harm being done when they settle these things. And so it's both sides know that it was just a cash cow for the lawyers, and they just wanted to let it go on a little bit longer. But gosh, even in leadership, they knew that they had to put the clamp on this thing because it's just ridiculous. I mean,
yeah.
If I could jump in there, I think we're glad to see some progress. The bill that passed the House today is a step in the right direction in reining back a lot of these very frivolous lawsuits and correcting what is arguably was a drafting error in the way they wrote it first time around. Unfortunately, what it wasn't in there is significant. They didn't include the retroactivity piece. So these businesses that lawsuits are currently underway, there's not at present full relief. They can point to what passed today and say, hey, this indicates what the legislature meant, and hopefully that will gain them some relief. But it would have been much better with a clause in there just specifying that this was retroactive, which the General Assembly has made other things retroactive in the past. So this isn't something totally unheard of. And that would have made this bill, taking it from a step in the right direction to a much better bill.
Yeah, listen, Noah, if this was a well-run state, or if we had a governing party in the state who wanted to do the right thing based on common sense, then that provision is a no-brainer. Even the Supreme Court, I think, would agree with that. Unfortunately, it's the state of Illinois. So I think sometimes too many of us are like, hey, we got crumbs and we're going to take the crumbs just for now. But you're right. I mean, this legislation should have been better. But thankfully, it looks like at least a step in the right direction and the work can continue. All right, let's go to our next topic. Noah, I know you have a crazy busy schedule, so we're not going to have you for the full episode. So I want to go straight to you on this. I've seen this come up a handful of times, and frankly, I wanted to know more about it. So you're going to educate me and our viewers on why this next topic even matters. So there's an effort in Springfield right now to eliminate or make illegal or ban what's called captive audience meetings. And unions are heavily pushing this. What the heck is a captive audience meeting, and why do unions want to ban this, and why should we care?
Well, under current U.S. federal law, under the National Labor Relations Act, employers are able to hold meetings if a union's trying to organize or workers are wanting to organize, so that the employer can present its side and share its perspective with its employees. So the pros and cons of unionizations, how that could impact merit, promotions, flexibility in the workplace, other things that they think that their employees should know before making the decision to join the union. This would make it much more difficult to hold those meetings. So under federal law, upheld by federal courts, upheld by the National Labor Relations Board, employers are permitted to hold mandated employee meetings to discuss these issues. This legislation that's currently under consideration here in Illinois would remove that ability to hold mandatory meetings to cover these topics. So if an employee, even if they can still hold voluntary meetings, but if down the road, an employee would say, hey, I didn't attend that, and because of that, I didn't get the promotion for this job, then they could potentially sue, because it opens up a right to private action. It opens up ability to levy civil fines as well on the employer. And an interesting thing about it is not just the employee who can sue, who arguably maybe they were harmed, but it also opens up an ability for interested parties, organizations, special like advocacy groups to sue the employer on behalf of employees who aren't actually claiming a harm. So it just really opens the door that these employers are going to be much more cautious about having any discussions about unionization in their workplace. They're going to have to be very cautious because they don't want to open up that Pandora's box and face the civil lawsuits. And so this is going to have a very chilling effect upon their ability to communicate with their employees about this issue, and also just really reduce the information that employees will have when they're making that critical decision, because it's their decision, the employee's decision to unionize, but they need access to a full range of information. And this is going to limit the amount of information that those employees will have access to.
So it's certainly going to help unions as they seek out more members and seek out places for people to unionize. I don't know, just for me, from listening to what you said and from reading what I've read over the last couple of weeks about this, it seems kind of weird that we're going to let unions talk to these employees as much as they want to try to help them to unionize, but the business owner is not allowed to have one meeting to say, hey, just FYI, here's what might happen if you guys do this. That part we're going to make illegal. That kind of seems a little iffy to me, and I'm actually fairly pro-union, so I'm saying that as not somebody who's out there as a big union hater. So I don't know. It seems like just overtly, I don't know, overtly partisan, like some things that have happened down in Springfield the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, it's under the National Labor Relations Act, the employees get to choose whether to unionize. That's their decision. But what this does is restricting their access to information from the employer perspective. And that information might be important to them as they make their decision. And so I'm not really quite clear why we want to limit information to them during this decision-making process. And I think it's kind of ironic also many of the proponents of this legislation, so they've garbed it as employer free speech initiative. So the employee. So the employee can choose not to attend, and that's the employee's speech. But these are the same groups who just a few years ago fought tooth and nail the Janus decision, which allowed employees not to pay union dues. And so they weren't concerned about the employee's ability to express affiliation or non-affiliation with the then, but now they're coming forward and saying they want to be the champion of employee free speech, and somehow it just doesn't really line up.
Yeah, there's a little bit of intellectual dishonesty there for sure. One thing I found interesting, I'm the political animal of the group. Something I found interesting is the main person pushing this, the leader of this, is Senator Robert Peters out of Chicago. And if Michael Butler was on this episode, he'd tell our viewers that he conveniently started getting ads in his Facebook timeline all the way in downstate Illinois from Senator Robert Peters. Rumors abound about how ambitious Robert Peters is and his plans for the future, and based on the fact that he's running statewide Facebook ads on this effort and on a pro-union effort, you can definitely tell there's some work here to set up his bona fides for some kind of future run. So just for our viewers, certainly something to keep an eye on. It's clear that Senator Robert Peters has some pretty big ambitions if he's running statewide ads.
Yeah, I think.
All right, Beth. Oh, go ahead.
One final comment here is that it contravenes federal law. The federal law lays out that this is an employer right. So we're seeing lawsuits in Connecticut, up in Minnesota on this topic. In Wisconsin, there was a lawsuit several years ago. The state settled and agreed not to enforce similar legislation. So it's really trying to limit employer rights under established federal law, and I think that's a key point.
Interesting. All right, I want to go to our next topic and pass it over to Beth. Beth, you've got sort of our person on the street perspective from a local government perspective. We hear so much about revenue and high-level billion-dollar decisions that happened down in Springfield during this period in these last couple of weeks. What we never hear about is the local impact. You are a leader in county government. You've been a leader in local government. You've got that perspective of all these things that Springfield tends to do, especially late in session, have big impacts on local communities and on local leaders, oftentimes with unfunded mandates. Talk to us a bit about that, about how Springfield tends to create problems that you guys in local government are constantly trying to overcome.
Yeah, well, I haven't really seen effects of the recent legislation so far recently in county government. One of our biggest controversial things right now, and I think the governor did this last year. I'm not a policy expert, I'll say that right now, but
neither am I. It's all good.
When the state is basically, solar panels are a big deal in our rural county and LaSalle County, and the state's basically forcing us to allow them to be here. It used to be the county board could vote whether to allow a solar farm or not, and now we really don't have that choice. However, we still have to vote on it, and it makes no sense.
But you still vote on it, but you can't actually say no.
Every time we vote on it, and
Isn't this how Russia does their elections for Putin every time he runs? You can vote, but you have to vote for Putin.
Right. So a lot of the Republicans will vote no as a protest. I'm one of the few that vote yes for the solar farms. I don't like solar farms. Usually I'm a nuclear power girl. I think solar farms are a waste of space and farmland, but I'm also for private property rights. So that's why I vote yes on those. In fact, last month I was the only Republican to vote yes. So, but no, that's the main thing. And then the sanctuary state business with the migrants. There have been a few counties who passed resolutions to be non-sanctuary for illegal immigration, and our county was one of those. So, I mean, things like that. The counties are starting to band together and push back on Springfield.
Yeah, I mean, it's needed. I mean, even we talked in previous episodes about the grocery tax, where it's good politics. The governor eliminated the grocery tax, but then you've got local municipalities that are getting big holes in their budgets because they were the ones who received that revenue. So Springfield gets all the glory for cutting your taxes, and then it's all the local municipalities that are going to foot the bill for that. So it just seems like a constant refrain here that Springfield's going to play politics and do what Springfield does, and all the rest of you in the local communities just figure out how to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your perspective on that. All right, let's go to our next topic here. So I know most of us are pretty economics focused, so we may not have a lot of perspectives on this. Maybe we will, let's see. But I think it's really interesting as we talk about one of the governor's key initiatives that he was pushing forward in this year. It was in his budget address, it was in his State of the State address, which are combined now, that he wanted to push this Healthcare Protection Act and Birth Equity Initiative. They've been his big things. And it only received one tiny little mention a while ago in Politico, Illinois, that one of the provisions in the Birth Equity Act would remove all copays and any sort of copay for abortions if you're insured in this state. And it was not covered over the one tiny mention. And I bet after mentioning it, Shia got an earful from the governor's office and was told never mention it again because it's never been mentioned since. And last week, we shined a light on it, as did a few other groups. And suddenly now there's a focus on this, and it's led to a lot of controversy. So it passed the House, moved into the Senate, but now the Senate is freaked out about this because people have finally realized it's in the bill. And so Democrats are fighting over it. Harmon and the Democrats have stripped the abortion provisions out of the birth equity bill, and now Personal PAC has come in, and they've said they're going to go to war over this. This has become a massive controversial thing in the final couple of weeks of session. So maybe not everyone will have thoughts on this, because I know abortion isn't maybe some of the things you guys cover, but be curious if you've got a perspective on what's going on with this and where might this lead. David, I'll put you on the spot. It looks like you want to say something. Go ahead.
It's one of those, I won't say it's one of those political fights that we always see at the end, though. It's usually about something like this that blows up, and they could hold the bill. They could hold the bill, and then when everybody's back calm again, they could run it during veto. This is not atypical for the last few days of the session for stuff like this to blow up like this, and so they've been in this position before. Either they're going to placate them and keep it in there, or they're just going to hold the bill. It's definitely where the tempers run high. So,
well. I just ashed all over myself, so clearly I'm a rookie here. One thing I'll say, and I know, Noah, you've got a few minutes left here, so I want to we'll go out of order here to get to your last topic before we lose you. But one thing I want to point to is I've said on multiple episodes that, as much as I hate to say it, the governor's team is pretty good politically, and they're very good with press. And it's not common to see them make a mistake. I think they made a mistake here on this. So it was not noticed by a lot, but it was certainly noticed by Democrats. The governor's campaign paid for a poll and then released it and sent it to all the Democrats to say, hey, you better support this, claiming that both of these acts are popular amongst Illinois voters. But anybody who's ever done any polling, you know that there's something called an informed question. So you can ask people, hey, do you like pizza? And you get their response. Or you can say, hey, pizza is really, really good. Here's why. Okay, now, do you like pizza? The second version there is an informed question where they give you a bunch of leading information and then they ask you again. So the governor's office or the governor's campaign did a poll where they did that, where they gave balanced information, but they won't release the script, so you know it wasn't balanced, in order to see where people stood on these issues, and then said, hey, look, this is the kind of support they have. So the Healthcare Protection Act, after getting both sets of messaging, supposedly, the Healthcare Protection Act got 61% of support. Anybody who does politics knows that you don't move forward with an issue that's at 61% support. That is too close to the center to make that issue a big push. When you're testing policies, you look for 70% plus to take an issue to the public because 61% is not ready for prime time. That is not something you push hard. But here's the thing, even worse. when they asked about this, the birth equity initiative, where this abortion piece is in, it is only at 53%. So after pushing people to support it, they can only get support for that birth equity initiative, only gets as high as 53%. You don't release that poll if that's as high as it gets. That means no matter what you do, this will not be popular to the public. I think they made a big mistake rolling that data out, because it says even after putting information out, the thing we're asking you to vote for, Democrats, is only supported by 53% in a blue state. I think that was a big error on their part. I think a lot of people are concerned about that bill, especially the abortion provisions. And that's why the Senate caucus is basically split on this, where you got more conservative, more downstate members who are like, heck no, we can't vote for this. And then you got the more progressive wing that's like, hey, we're going to go to war over this. You better include it. And I think it's putting Democrats in a pretty tough spot here in the final days of session.
I think it's important to note, to zoom out, not just that particular policy, but some of these changes that are being pushed on for insurance coverage right now. So looking to expand coverage to new procedures, looking to reduce cost sharing, looking to reduce other steps that are meant to keep costs in line for insurance. Someone's going to have to pay for that down the road. And what happens is these new regulations do not apply to your large plans, your ERISA plans. These only apply to the state regulated plans. And those are the plans that small businesses primarily have. So as we get rid of cost control measures for whatever the procedure is, so we get rid of that is going to drive up the cost potentially of premiums that your small employers and their employees are paying. Sometimes I think that gets lost in some of the drama about, oh, let's put this in, let's put that, and make sure we get coverage. The bottom line is someone's paying. That's going to be your premium payer. And your small business, the person who's actually purchasing the insurance. And I think that's important to keep in perspective when all these other things are being discussed.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And I just say, to the people in Springfield who are concerned about this, you look at the polling memo that the governor's campaign put out, where they claimed both things have a ton of support in the public. Yet look at how many times the BEI, as they term it in that polling memo, is mentioned. It's never actually mentioned. The headline is both things are really popular with the public, and then if you actually read the memo, this part of it is never mentioned because it's actually not popular with the public. So just something to keep in mind. Anyways, I know we're on a time clock because we're about to lose you. So let's move on, even though I'd love to rant about this more. Maybe I'll rant about it in a future episode. But no, I know you wanted to talk about inflation. It's a big thing that I know you at NFIB are really putting a focus on. We've talked a lot, inflation is sort of the focus from a policy perspective, cost of living from a end user perspective, but they're the same thing. This is a huge issue, and I know it's a big problem facing small businesses. So before we lose you, why don't you jump on this topic and just give us some insight in how bad inflation is for your members, and especially those small businesses around the state.
Yeah, inflation is huge. We do a monthly survey with NFIB and ask our members, what is the top issue that you're facing? And inflation has been at the top of the charts for quite a while now. It's up there. They're also struggling to find good employees, but inflation has consistently remained very much at the top. And that's really been borne out in what we're seeing right now in the federal data. Like for a long time, we had politicians trying to take a victory lap saying inflation was over. It's not. We've seen inflation climbing again. Yesterday, there's a report, there's a slight decline year over year in the CPI, but it's still very much above the targeted rate of about 2%. Yesterday's rate came in at 3.4. And just earlier this week, we saw another poll. This is the PPI, or the wholesale price index for inflation, and that jumped way above 0.5% in the month of April. What our businesses are paying for goods, and this is very concerning. We're seeing prices are still up there. Our small employees, they're paying more for their for goods. They're having to pay their employees more, so their costs are going up. But at the same time, our surveys are showing sales and profits are also declining for them, at least on aggregate. Not every business, but when you take in aggregate, all our respondents. And that is producing real pessimism among the small business community. And we've consistently seen that small business optimism is very low right now because there's so much uncertainty out there. This cost, ever rising costs, and that's really small businesses are taking it on the chin.
Well, and listen, I'm not overly prone to hyperbole, but and it kills me to say this, but this is like that George Orwell quote. I mean, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears. Just trust us. Inflation is just fine. But go ahead and go to the grocery store and stand there at the checkout line and just tell each person as they're checking out, inflation's fine. You're good. The data says you're not paying more. You're fine. I mean, that's the reality of everyday people, of working families, of small businesses. I mean, Christen, I'd ask you, is inflation fine? I mean, you're a small business owner. You're a working mom or a working person in this state. I mean, is inflation just fine?
So interesting. So I've had an interesting ride as a restaurant owner. I opened my restaurant in 2020 on a Monday, and at noon on Thursday, I became an illegal restaurant because the governor shut down indoor dining. In 2020, I was able to buy a lemon for 33 cents. Today, it's 99 cents. So no, things are not okay. We've had to go from 12 employees. Now I can only afford 7. You know, I'm paying those 7 employees more than I did in 2020. But I can't afford 12 employees any longer. And what's been really hard for me as a small cafe that only serves lunch and then does catering on the weekends is that I buy my food wholesale, right? But I can't even get a truck unless I spend between $500 and $900, depending on which wholesaler I'm going through. So basically, one of those 7 jobs, imagine if every time you had to go to the grocery store, you know, you couldn't just go in and buy a gallon of milk or buy some sugar. You had to spend several $100s every single time you go to the grocery store. So basically, I've had to take one of those 7 employees and use them to go do my grocery shopping locally, because every time I need some eggs or some milk, I can't be forced to spend $500, right? So it's also leading to me having food shortages because, well, I know I get my chicken and my seafood from this vendor, but I can't place a $500 order. So I'm just going to have to say, sorry, we're out. And I think anybody that's been to a restaurant, if you'll think about it or start noticing, you'll see a lot more on menus and even kiosks and drive-through say, sorry, we're out of this, sorry, we're out of that. And it's just causing so many supply chain issues. But no, we are not okay. I would love to open at least 2 more different restaurants. I have the real estate to do it, but until this inflation just calms down a little bit, no way.
Well, and you've got, I mean, talk about out of touch politicians. You've got Biden saying they have the money to spend in a national interview. You know, it's these politicians are just so out of touch with working families. And it's like we've heard for years. So they say, oh, the economy's great because Wall Street's doing fine. But ask the mom and pop shops, ask people on Main Street if the economy's been doing great. It's just they continue with this narrative of trying to say, oh, the data says we're doing great. The data says the state of Illinois is doing just fine. But ask those small businesses how optimistic they are of the state's economy. They're going to tell you that there's significant challenges, and this is one of the major reasons why. Noah, any final thoughts? I know you're tight on time, so any final thoughts? Otherwise, feel free to jump off
here. But thank you very much for having me on. Really appreciate it. And once again, sorry I have to bounce out early.
You're good, man. You're good. We'll get you on in a future episode. Everybody check out NFIB and the excellent work they do nationwide, but especially in the state of Illinois. Noah, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you.
Hey,
Anybody else have thoughts on inflation? Go ahead, Beth.
Oh yeah, I'm working on a state rep race in the 76th district, and we just started knocking on doors the past few weeks, and I've knocked on hundreds of doors now in the 76th district, and inflation's #1 almost every time. People are just hurting. It's heartbreaking, honestly. You know, these are mostly middle class people who, you know, used to be able to go out and have some fun sometimes, but they can't even do that. It's just, you know, they barely scrape by just to be able to get groceries, and it's really, really sad to see. And we're knocking on a lot of swing voter doors, soft Democrats even, and the Democrat, it kills me. I just want to shake them because they say, oh, the state is so poorly managed. I can't afford anything. And I'm like, why do you keep voting for the same thing over and
Right.
over and over? It's not the definition of insanity. I don't say that, of course, I'm very polite, but what do we do? How do we convince
Well,
people? How bad does it have to get?
Yeah, well, it's a valid point, and shout out, as you mentioned, House District 76 to Liz Bishop, the candidate I know you're working with there. She's a great candidate, and it's going to be a good race for people to keep an eye on. So everybody watch House District 76 and maybe connect with Beth on Facebook. You can see her out there knocking on doors constantly. She puts her shoe leather where her mouth is and gets out there and talks to voters, which I love. But this is the real world impact. I mean, our polling has shown that cost of living is one of the top issues to voters. We saw a poll recently that had 49% of voters said cost of living was the top issue to them. And you usually see the top issue in the 20s, not the high 40s of how many people say that's their number one issue. People don't think it's affordable to live in this state, especially. And this is one of the big reasons why. And yet these politicians keep telling you, don't worry, it's fine. You've still got money to spend.
Yeah, and there's 177 legislators down here, Republican or Democrat. They make a pretty nice income. And so when you're talking about the average person on inflation, they can afford it. But when you're talking about business owners, probably 80–90% of the legislators have never experienced what it's like to run a business. So here you've got them coming out of the social sciences field, the legal field, the teaching field, the government field. And they don't come out of the business field. And so they don't know, they think there's some pot of money back there that the businesses have that they can afford all these things. So when they're talking about inflation affecting businesses, it doesn't really resonate with them just because they've never been through that. But they, and so when we talk about policies that they pass that hurt the business community or they don't think will hurt their business community, a lot of that is just due to ignorance and not being able to visualize or being able to know what it's like to run a business and afford the same things or afford things that the average everyday customer needs to afford. So,
illustrating your point, I mean, I know you with your client TMA and Rich, I know works on this as well, bringing lawmakers out to just manufacturers and letting them see how these manufacturers operate and learn from their employees, from their leadership, just how manufacturing works and the struggles. And we've seen how eye-opening that is for these legislators who have never stepped foot in a manufacturing plant, and how it changes their opinion oftentimes on legislation down in Springfield now that they actually know how manufacturing works.
Yeah, we had a visit with a legislator, Democrat, who came out to a manufacturing facility, and Noah was talking earlier about the Paid Leave Act that went into effect in January, and this visit I think was back in October, November. And this was a company that gave paid leave to all their employees well beyond what the mandate was. But the cost was in the hours, the dozens of hours it was taking them to fill out the paperwork to show the state that they actually complied with this mandate. And they couldn't figure it out. It was very vague. And they were just spending so much time trying to show them that they not only comply with the mandate, but already were well beyond what the mandate was. But it's just, they put these laws in and they don't understand what goes into actual compliance with it. And that's really, one of those time killers, one of those cost killers for small businesses that a lot of these legislators just don't see and don't understand. Yeah,
absolutely. Interesting. All right, well, let's keep moving along here. So I want to go to this. So in the last week, if you've been paying attention to Illinois politics, you know that CTU and CPS have taken a day off school to send teachers and I think principals, maybe even some students went down. I was going to ask David, but he may have had to jump off, who all were part of this. But there was a big push to basically take over Springfield in the Chicago Public Schools effort to get more funding. Brandon Johnson wants over $1 billion more for Chicago Public Schools. They were asking during those meetings for more like $550 million. But for a state, if you were watching the beginning of this episode, that has no money, you've got Chicago Public Schools coming in asking for giant piles of cash, which I think is, from what I've heard, is basically just falling on deaf ears. What have you heard, Rich?
It's further tone deafness, I think, from what's going on in Chicago versus what's going on in Springfield. I mean, it's just like, you mentioned the mayor, going down last week. You know, and on his way down, he says, yeah, I'm going down because the state of Illinois owes us $1 billion. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, I wonder how the governor feels about that statement. And the same thing with the Bears, you know, going down there, and the White Sox saying, give us $1 billion so we can buy a new, you know, stadium. It's like they almost don't understand what's going on in Springfield. They're obviously not following it. They don't understand that there's not only a money crunch, they're, you know, $800 million short unless they get these business tax increases, and they just keep coming down and asking for more and more and more. And I think, you know, to the governor's credit, he's just basically saying, sorry, you know, we have to focus on what we're dealing with right now. And it's just kind of crazy. You keep seeing all this. They keep coming down and just getting shut out completely. All these groups.
I love doing these episodes for me because I learn. And one thing that I learned that was not a perspective that I had was one of our guests, Mark Cavers, recently said what he hates about this is it helps the governor look more reasonable. And I think this is yet another one of those cases where when you look at, you know, CTU and CPS coming down and Brandon Johnson coming down asking for gobs of money, it puts Pritzker in the situation to look like he's fiscally responsible when that is the furthest thing from the truth. But these far left groups are so far left that they make our very progressive governor actually look like a mainstream, you know, moderate governing leader, which he is the furthest thing from. And so, you know, number one, we need to tie all Democrats to this out of control spending. But number two, what's frustrating is it helps Democrats look actually reasonable when in truth, they've exploded the budget. They have massively increased state spending. And now they're looking for more taxes to fund even more spending. And so, yeah, I think it's a perspective worth noting here that this makes Pritzker look reasonable, as you just gave Pritzker kudos when frankly it probably wasn't deserved.
Exactly. I mean, but that's, you know, that's what people think, you know, like I said, it's just like, you know, if you listen to any sports radio talk, you know, when they were going down to Springfield asking for $1 billion, $2 billion, you know, they were all quoting the governor saying, sorry, we have other things to focus on. And they were all agreeing with the governor. And you're right. It's unfortunate, but, you know, you wish these guys would kind of read the tea leaves a little bit, what's going on in Springfield before they take the jaunt down 55, you know, and it's kind of like, I don't get it.
Well, even people you'd expect to be allies of the far left have pointed to that day of action as being fairly underwhelming. So you can tell how effective that was. But I know there's perspectives that were shared privately in our discussions during the week before these episodes start about people being frustrated that kids or that teachers were being taken out of school to do this. You know, personally, I don't have as big of an issue with this as I did when they were taking people out of school to vote for the Bring Chicago Home referendum. It's one thing to pull people out of school to go vote for something super, super partisan, but take them out to go advocate for something you believe in down in Springfield. I don't know, maybe I'm in the minority on this, but I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem with them going down and advocating. I just wish maybe they had more reasonable requests that were based in reality. But, you know, I think we're a representative government for a reason. So I like the fact that people are going down and engaging with government. You know, maybe we don't have to hurt kids in the process, but I do like the fact that people are engaging. Just maybe be smarter with what you're engaging on. All right, let's keep moving along here as we are quickly running out of time. So we've had a chance to talk with Charlie Meyer in the past, and a bill that he's been looking at very closely is coming up down in Springfield, and we got to talk about it. So the Dignity in Pay Act is an effort down in Springfield that Pritzker is now backing, that majority Democrats are backing, to basically make it so that the minimum wage applies even to those who have disabilities. And it's such a sexy, if I can say that, political issue. We're taking care of those with disabilities and making sure that they have equity and they're paid their fair share. This plays super well in a mail piece. But as Charlie's pointed out, in reality, it doesn't play super well. We've had a chance at CORE. We've had the opportunity to work with social service agencies over the years. There's one I'm thinking of in particular up by you, Rich, Pioneer Center, that does an amazing job taking those with disabilities and finding them employment. It's awesome because there is dignity in that work. The challenge is that talk to any business owner, they have to pay you what you're worth. That's how the market works. And so if you can't produce enough value to businesses that you're not worth a higher amount of money, they can't pay you a higher amount of money. And those with disabilities, I want them to have these jobs and the dignity that comes with it. But the whole point of this 14C sort of section within the law is to allow employers to say, awesome, we'd love to have you. We can only pay you X, but we'd love to have you here. Do you want to come work for that amount? It's an at-will choice. They're not forced to come work for that amount, but it does give them that opportunity. It lets businesses give back a little bit and invest in their communities. It's a great thing the way the law is right now. But if they raise this to now the minimum wage, some stats have been out there that the costs are going to explode in this area. And as a result, businesses just aren't going to be able to hire these people with disabilities because they won't have the funding to be able to do it. The groups that will have the funding, those groups that work on government funding, of course, they're all backing this because government will just give them a little extra money, and now they can pay that extra money to these employees. But for those social service agencies that don't rely on that government funding, to these community organizations, to these small businesses, we're trying to do a good thing in their community. That's Charlie's point. They can't now if these costs explode into what might be triple their current costs based on some estimates. So it's well-intentioned legislation that looks good on a mail piece, but it's going to hurt the very people that it's intended to help. But that's nuance, and voters don't do nuance. So here we are, yet another situation of good politics taking precedence in Springfield over good policy.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I mean, this another mandate, another attempt to raise the minimum wage, and it's just going to cause people not to get jobs. These are folks who really love their jobs. They love to work, they love to get out there. And like you mentioned, Pioneer Center, what a great organization. And one of the great things they do is they provide independent housing and and work opportunities for developmentally disabled adults. And, it's just amazing when you see them out in the community, participating, working, getting a wage. And unfortunately, what this is going to do is it's going to limit those opportunities. And it's unfortunate.
Well, there's a local jewel by me that I remember even as a kid. They had their baggers were almost exclusively people with disabilities, and I loved that. I always thought it was awesome. I would make a point to go to that jewel to interact with these individuals. I don't know how much they were being paid. I don't know. And Jewel probably has the money to pay them well, so maybe they're being paid a minimum wage or above. I don't know. But it's that kind of thing that might get hurt or will get hurt by legislation like this. And we had a family friend who had disabilities who worked at Jewel for decades. And it was his pride and joy to be there and to interact with people and to bag their groceries. He loved it. And the sweetest man, he was, I don't know how to term this in a PC way, but he was definitely very far on the spectrum of being disabled. He had a lot of challenges, but he could have a job. And we would drive him to work sometimes because he didn't have a ride sometimes. I mean, it was such a wonderful thing for him and for the community at large to rally around. And that's the kind of thing this is going to hurt. I don't know. And it's my one thing, if Noah was here, I'd ask him about this. It's part of a larger trend that I've been seeing, which is this push. Government just wants to employ everybody. They don't want private sector to employ everyone. They want government to employ everyone. If you look at in the last year in Illinois, people are saying they've been celebrating, government has been celebrating that there's been 17,000 jobs added over the last year in Illinois. But if you dive down in those numbers, actually almost 29,000 were added in government. Meanwhile, almost 12,000 were lost in the private sector. So the net number is, yes, a positive number, but the private sector has lost 12,000 jobs. It's only because government is hiring more people that the numbers look better than they actually are. This continues that trend. Government agencies will have plenty of money because they'll just take more money from we taxpayers to increase these costs. Meanwhile, it's just a further drag on the private sector and on local organizations and nonprofits who don't get that government funding. It's this trend towards government just employing everybody.
Yeah.
All right, well.
Yeah, government should not be involved in setting it. I'll say something controversial. I think the minimum wage should be abolished. I think what you said, Collin, the free market should decide what it is. Business owners should decide what it is. Potential employee comes, he's okay with the wage. Business owners okay with the wage. They make the agreement and they go. That would solve all.
I'll say this. I mean, Christen, I'd ask you too, as an employer. I've been an employer for a long time, and I've really benefited from other companies not paying their people well, or competitors who maybe wouldn't go hire that female or that African American or that Hispanic individual who might need some extra training because they don't have as much experience. I've benefited from that because I go and scoop those people up. I hire them because they are supremely talented. And so, as you said, the private sector the free market does tend to balance these things out, where if you're stupid enough to not be willing to pay people what they're worth, guess what? It's an at-will employment system in this country. So people like me who are say, good, I'll take them. You're dumb enough to not want to pay them, or you don't want to hire them, then I will happily take those talented people and work with me. Christen, I think the same would be true for you guys. You take care of your employees. You see someone else who's not going to do the right thing, you'll gobble that talent up in a heartbeat, I'd imagine.
I would just say, as a business owner in general, there's already systems in place. There is a minimum wage, right? There are amazing companies that employ people with special needs. I worked for Kroger all the way through my education process, and same sort of situation. There were lots of baggers that were given a job and able to work. And it makes me sad to think that that might not exist. But if you raise those wages, I doubt those folks will still have a job. One of the situations I've experienced with my cafe is I had a state plumbing inspector come and tell me that I had to pick off the doors. One said ladies and one said gentlemen. And he told me I had to pick that off the door, that was against the rules. And I said, really? And he says, yeah, that's one of my unfunded mandates that I have to go around and yell at people about. And the situation is that as a business owner, it's just a constant stream of ways that I'm just trying to stay up with all the laws, stay up with all the changes, stay up with the ever-changing way that these lawmakers are trying to make themselves look wonderful to the public. But we all know that it's just smoke and mirrors, right? I mean, yeah, it's very, I try to stay positive, and I try to say, well, let's look at the good. We're still able to make it. We're still open, right? But I can tell you that entrepreneurship in Illinois is really, really hard. It's not something that I would recommend to my children.
Yeah, well, that in and of itself is a challenge, right? If not enough people are going to be there to create these jobs, then what opportunities will there be for the supremely talented and hardworking people of this state? So, all right, because of time, we're going to move to what is our last topic, even though there's like 6 or 7 more in the agenda, but we're out of time. So, last topic here, and this one, I guess it's not the worst thing if Noah and David aren't here for this one, because it's a little more partisan, I'll admit. But this is a topic I wanted to add. This is our Empower to Win topic of the week. If you're not a subscriber to our EmpowerToWin platform, I strongly encourage you to join it. It is made for people like us, people like our viewers. It provides exclusive support and knowledge-based forums, information on how to engage politically in a more effective way, exclusive polling every month on what issues are resonating, what messages should you use with voters on those issues. So really encourage you to take a look at that. Lane will bring up on screen the domain. It's just EmpowerTo.win. But for this topic this week, I want to talk about this because this has just come up over the last couple of weeks where even Democrats are realizing they might be in a trick bag here. So a trick that Democrats down in Springfield have done for years is they will pass bills that sound really, really good on paper, but they'll put in the language, this is subject to appropriations. What that means is we haven't actually appropriated money for this. We probably don't even have money for this, but we're going to pass a law. We're going to pat ourselves on the back, and then it's just never, ever going to get funded. I mean, this is like that big, the school lunches for working families and those in lower income communities, that Springfield passed with a lot of fanfare, a lot of press coverage, but then they never funded the damn thing because it was subject to appropriations. And there's more and more of this lately where even Democrats like Fred Crespo have come out and said, guys, this is a problem. And our buddy Patrick Finkson over at the Illinois, he scooped me on this because he got a quote a couple days ago in one of his newsletters where even a Democrat admitted this might be a problem because they said that the more that they add these spending demands, the more that Democrats open themselves to liability here. And here's how. And this is that advice here for Republicans. Republicans should be capturing every bill that Springfield legislators that Democrats pass that are subject to appropriations. And then each year, when Democrats don't fund those bills, we ought to be going into every vulnerable Democrats district and saying, Democrats did not fund blank. This is the same game that Democrats do to us. They put this giant bill for the budget out there that Republicans have no chance to vote for. And in that, they have like rape kits and testing and support for, pregnant women. They put all these smaller provisions in that bill. And then when Republicans don't vote for the $55 billion package, they run ads in those Republican districts saying Republicans hate women because they didn't fund rape kits. This is the game they play, but it can be spun around on them. With all of these subject to appropriations bills that Democrats have passed, when they don't vote for funding for those bills, we should be turning this around and going after them for it, saying, hey, guess what? They didn't fund lunches for low-income families, for kids who can't afford lunch in school. Democrats didn't fund that. Democrats didn't fund all these bills that are great things. Republicans should be taking advantage of this opportunity. And the more Democrats, it's been more and more lately they've been doing this. And I think it creates a key vulnerability that Republicans should absolutely pounce on. Let's play the same game back at them that they always play on us. So that's my little rant. I don't know if you guys even have thoughts on that, but I think they're opening themselves up to some big vulnerabilities if we're smart enough to take advantage. It might just be a Collin rant topic and we all just move on. Is that what that one is? All right. Let's move to the close because we're way over time. So we, as always, we give everybody a chance to give their final thoughts in this closing. Let's start with you, Beth. Any thoughts on any topics you want to share as we close this down? We'd love to hear from you.
Any topic?
Any topic. Go for it. You got the floor as we close.
All right. Well, I gotta do a plug for my state representative candidate for the 76th district. If you've been following that race, it's very interesting because I believe it's the only race in the state that had a primary on both sides. And so I think it was the only one. And Lance Yednock, he's a Democrat. He's held this seat for a few terms now. He's not running again. And he's not running again because his caucus became way too liberal. He admitted that because he is a moderate Democrat. And so we had really interesting primaries on both sides, 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And now we're working really hard. We got the campaign going strong and we got the opponent that we want too. And she's very progressive and she doesn't fit the district. And we're going to win this race. So stay tuned.
I like it. Well, Lane will bring up and post a map of that district so everyone knows exactly where it is that you're talking about. Maybe some people will come help you out and knock it on doors. 76. Trump does not do that bad in that district. He only lost by 8 in that district.
Right.
Locally, it only votes D2. That is definitely a working class, more moderate district. It is not a far left district. So you're right, Beth. That's definitely a district people should be looking at. Christen, final thoughts from you as we close this down.
Collin, thank you for letting me be a part of this. I do want to touch on what you said just a few minutes ago, as far as we are going to have to play just as hard, just as mean, and just as dirty as the Democrats to get things done. In my community, we are a deep Southern, polite Southern hospitality community, and we tend to vote for the nice guy or the nice gal, right? Boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could raise up some people that said, I'm aggressive, I'm going to jump on these opportunities, and let's defeat the Democrats. It would be really, really nice to see. And so I hope that people will take advantage of suggestions like you made earlier, Collin, to use these weaknesses against the Democrats to get some things done, because we really do need some change in our state. And as a local small business owner, I think I've had a front row seat to that.
Yeah, well, you're a fighter, I know from seeing you in action. So if we get more Republican candidates and Republican leaders want to fight, like I know you're ready to fight. I grew up in Cook County politics, so sometimes I get pushback a little bit on the fact that I'll do many times fight whatever it takes to win. Not whatever it takes, but get out there and if the other side's gonna treat this like a war, it's time we treated it just like the war that it is. Because this is lives. This is lives and livelihoods that are on the line. This isn't patty cake. Democrats know that, and sometimes we can play a little too nice on the Republican side. So I like your message there. Rich, final thoughts, man.
I would just say, we talked a lot about a lot of these issues, and things that are mind-boggling. Things like what Noah talked about, as far as that the state passing laws, that completely aren't fair to either, to the employers. And And I think Beth said, what's it going to take? And it's kind of crazy. You look at the Democrats in Illinois have had super majorities. They not only have super majorities in both the House and the Senate, they have all statewide offices, constitutional offices. They have everything. They control everything. And they keep doing these things that you think, you look at it on its face and it's kind of like, how can they get away with this? And the reason they get away with it is because they control everything. They can do whatever they want. You know, just like the slating bill they passed last week. Completely unfair. But it doesn't matter because they control everything and they can do what they want. I just wish the voters would look back at what's going to happen next week when the state passes another budget, and they're going to ding, you know, the taxpayers again. They're going to ding the business owners. And I wish people would just start to pay attention and realize that they can do something. And, you know, what they can do is they can go vote on November 5th for reasonableness. And that's what I'd love to see.
Well, and as you said, next week they're going to ding the taxpayers, but then they're going to run ads, millions of dollars of ads to voters for the next 5 months saying, we're so fiscally responsible. We've lowered your taxes, even though that's not actually the case. And then voters are going to forget because that's always what happens. So I like your optimism, Rich. Michael will be very proud of you and for being optimistic. Thank you to our guests, and thank you to the two we had to lose there. Noah, I know, is super busy with session closing down, and David, his internet cut out on him, the poor guy. I just want to say this about David, one of the sweetest people you'll ever meet. Even just my personal experience, he is invested time over the decades to help people who want to get involved in politics. He helped me when I was early on in politics. So I just want to give a shout out to David for being just an awesome human. Thank you, Beth, Christen. It was awesome to have you guys with us this week. Rich, we'll see if we want to have you back again. We'll decide that in future episodes. I kid. Thank you to Lane, our producer. Thank you to our viewers. We will catch you next week, and we're going to be down in the state conventions. You're going to get a lot. The Republican convention is next week. We encourage you to attend. We're going to be doing a lot from the convention, so you're going to get a lot of hot off the presses information from the convention on next week's episode. So you don't want to miss it. Catch us next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.